Forbidden Love, a dark Korean love story. Seoul never truly sleeps. Even in the deepest hours of night, the city breathes, quietly, patiently, holding the weight of lives that move through it unseen. Neon lights flicker against wet pavement. Footsteps echo, then disappear. Somewhere, laughter fades into silence. Somewhere else, a secret is being born. This is not a story about fate arriving loudly. It is about two people who met quietly and changed each other completely. Seo-rin learned early that love could disappear without warning. Her marriage did not end in shouting or violence. It ended in absence, the slow, unbearable kind, the kind where conversations shorten, where affection becomes obligation, where you begin to feel invisible next to the person who once knew you best. She stayed longer than she should have, not because she was weak, but because she believed endurance was love. Eventually, she understood the truth. Endurance without care is not love, it is erasure. So she left, not dramatically, not with accusations. She packed her life into quiet decisions and walked away with her daughter and a future that felt terrifyingly undefined. From that moment on, survival became her language. Every morning was an act of discipline. She woke early, not because she wanted to, but because fear demanded preparation. Bills had to be paid, food had to be measured, strength had to be rationed. Hope felt indulgent, dreams felt irresponsible. She did not feel broken, she felt divided between the woman she had been and the woman she had to become. Junhyuk lived on the opposite side of the city and the opposite side of morality. Power followed him everywhere. People moved when he entered a room. Silence arrived before he spoke. Fear worked faster than words ever could. Violence had once felt necessary, then efficient, then routine. Control replaced meaning, and peace never came. He told himself that morality was flexible, that survival justified cruelty, that tenderness was weakness. He told himself many things. None of them brought rest. Their meeting was unremarkable. A bakery on a narrow street, warm light spilling onto cold pavement, the smell of bread cutting through the night air. Seorin looked up from the counter. Junhyuk slowed. Nothing dramatic happened, but something shifted. Love did not arrive with fireworks. It grew in restraint, in shared silence, in routines that felt safe, in conversations that did not demand explanation. Seorin felt seen and feared it. Junhyuk felt human and feared that more. She noticed the way his hands curled into fists and relaxed again. He noticed the way her eyes always measured exits. They recognized vigilance in each other. It created understanding before affection. Weeks passed, then months. Love grew carefully, not recklessly. Seorin learned to trust his consistency. Junhyuk learned to trust her strength. Her daughter watched everything. Children always do. Then the shadows returned. The city does not forgive easily. The day her daughter vanished arrived without warning. Brutally ordinary, a missed moment, an absence where sound should have been. Seorin collapsed inward. Junhyuk became precise. At the abandoned dock warehouse, rain fell like judgment. Neon reflected against water and rust. Violence waited patiently. Junhyuk shielded the child with his body. He ended the threat. He chose consequence because some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. Prison did not redeem him. Time did. Waiting stripped illusion. Silence dismantled ego. Hope became discipline. Seorin rebuilt without bitterness. She worked. She raised her daughter. She refused to let fear define her. Years passed. When Jun Hyuk returned, there were no speeches. Healing does not announce itself. Seorin did not rush toward him. She acknowledged him. That restraint was not distance, it was wisdom. Life rearranged itself into rhythm, not happiness, but predictability. Peace crept in quietly, suspiciously. Seorin distrusted comfort. Junhyuk distrusted freedom. Power had once structured his life. Without it, silence asked questions. Who are you when no one is afraid? Her daughter studied him, not fearfully, thoughtfully. She asked questions children ask when they sense truth beneath comfort. Why did you go away? Why do people whisper? Why do you look sad when everything is okay? Junhyuk never lied. I made choices, he said, and choices follow you. She accepted that. Seorin worried about permanence, not danger, but belonging. Could she love without losing herself again? Junhyuk sensed her hesitation. I don't know how to belong, he admitted one night. I only know how to stay useful. That confession changed everything. The city tested them. A name whispered. A look held too long. Seorin asked the question she had avoided. Will your past follow us forever? Yes, Junhyuk said, but it won't decide our future unless we let it. He began rebuilding his life honestly, slowly, legitimately. Failure humbled him. Patience reshaped him. At a school event, surrounded by parents and laughter, her daughter chose him, sat beside him, held his hand, unafraid. That was the moment Seorin knew. Love had already decided. Time passed. Peace strengthened. Arguments softened. Listening replaced winning. Years later, legacy surfaced quietly. A letter arrived, not threatening, not demanding. A name from the past, someone he had spared, someone who wanted closure. The meeting was brief, heavy, transformative. That night, Junhyuk told Seorin everything. She listened. She stayed. Her daughter grew into a young woman with steady eyes and thoughtful silence. You didn't save my life, she told him one day. You changed how I see men. That became his legacy. Seorin stopped thinking of herself as someone who escaped. She became someone who chose, every day. They aged gently. Loss arrived, as it always does. But love adapted. That was its strength. Redemption was no longer a destination. It was a practice, daily, quiet. They spoke about death once, not fearfully, practically. Seorin wanted to be remembered as kind. Junhyuk wanted to be remembered as gentle. They laughed. The city remained unchanged. The shadows still existed, but fear no longer dictated direction. One evening by the river, Seorin rested her head against his shoulder. No urgency, no fear, just time, allowed to pass. Because the greatest love stories are not the ones that burn brightest, but the ones that endure quietly after the fire is gone. Soul never truly sleeps. Even in the quietest hours of the night, the city breathes, softly, steadily, as if it is remembering every life that has passed through it. Neon signs flicker against wet pavement. Traffic hums in the distance, like a restless thought that never fully disappears. Somewhere, a door closes. Somewhere else, a secret begins. This is not a story about fate arriving dramatically. It is about two people who met quietly and changed each other completely. Seo Rin learned early that love could disappear without warning. Not suddenly, not violently, but slowly, in ways that are far more painful to name. Her marriage did not end with shouting matches or broken furniture. It ended in silence, in conversations that no longer reached their destination, in apologies that came too late and meant too little, in the gradual realization that she was living beside someone who no longer saw her. She stayed longer than she should have, not because she was weak, but because she believed endurance was proof of love. She believed that if she tried harder, waited longer, gave more of herself, things would eventually return to what they had once been. That belief cost her years. When she finally understood the truth, it was almost gentle. Endurance without care is not love, it is erasure. So she left, quietly. No accusations, no dramatic final argument. She packed what mattered, took her daughter's hand, and walked away from the life she had imagined into a future that felt frighteningly undefined. From that moment on, survival became her language. Every morning was an act of discipline. She woke before sunrise, not because she wanted to, but because preparation had become instinct. Bills needed to be paid, food needed to stretch, time needed to be managed with precision. There was no room for error anymore. Hope felt indulgent, dreams felt irresponsible. She learned how to function on determination alone. She did not feel broken. She felt divided between the woman she had once been, soft, trusting, open, and the woman she had to become, careful, alert, self-contained. Both lived inside her at the same time. That was the hardest part. Jun Hyuk lived on the opposite side of the city, and the opposite side of morality. Power followed him everywhere. It arrived before he did. People moved instinctively when he entered a room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Fear obeyed him faster than loyalty ever could. He had learned early that hesitation was dangerous. Violence at first had felt necessary, then efficient, then routine. Eventually, it became invisible. Control replaced meaning, and peace never arrived. He told himself the stories men like him always tell themselves, that morality was flexible, that survival justified cruelty, that tenderness was weakness disguised as virtue. He repeated those beliefs until they sounded like truth. But repetition does not make something true. It only makes it familiar. Junhyuk did not remember the last time he had felt rested. Sleep came, but it never stayed. Even in silence, his mind remained alert, scanning for threats that no longer existed. Power demands vigilance. Authority demands paranoia. And over time, the body forgets how to relax. He had everything men like him were supposed to want: influence, resources, fear. And yet, nothing inside him felt settled. Their meeting was unremarkable. That was what made it dangerous. It happened in a small bakery, tucked between narrow buildings on a quiet street. Warm light spilled from the windows into the night. The smell of fresh bread cut through the cold air like a memory from another life. Seorin was behind the counter, focused, efficient, careful not to waste motion. Junhyuk stepped inside to escape the cold. She looked up. He slowed. Nothing dramatic happened. No sparks. No grand exchange. But something shifted. Seorin noticed him because he waited. Not impatiently, not arrogantly. He stood still, hands relaxed, eyes observant but not intrusive. He did not rush her. He did not demand attention. That alone made him different. Jun Hyuk noticed her because she was present, not performative, not deferential. She met his gaze without submission and without challenge. Just awareness. The kind that comes from someone who has already learned how to stand alone. They exchanged a few words, ordinary words, but something about the silence between them felt intentional. Love did not arrive loudly. It crept in slowly, almost unnoticed, in the way he returned to the bakery without reason, in the way she remembered his order without being asked, in the way conversations extended a little longer each time. Seorin felt seen and feared it. Being seen meant risk. Being noticed meant something could be taken away again. Junhyuk felt human and feared that more. Humanity was vulnerability. Vulnerability was danger. They learned each other in fragments. He noticed how her eyes always measured exits. She noticed how his hands curled into fists and then relaxed again. They recognized vigilance in each other. That created understanding before affection. Weeks passed, then months. Love grew carefully, not recklessly. They did not rush. They did not promise. They allowed consistency to do the work. Passion usually tries to accomplish. Seorin trusted his presence. Junhyuk trusted her restraint. Her daughter watched everything. Children always do. She noticed how he spoke softly, how he never raised his voice, how he never assumed space that was not offered. She did not fear him. She studied him. Seorin noticed something else too. For the first time since her divorce, she was not bracing herself for disappointment. She still guarded her heart. But she no longer felt exhausted by that guarding. Junhyuk noticed that he laughed more, not loudly, genuinely, and that unsettled him. The city, however, does not forget easily. Shadows have long memories. The day her daughter disappeared arrived without warning. It was cruelly ordinary, a routine afternoon, a moment of distraction, an absence where sound should have been. Esiorin felt the world contract. The panic did not scream. It hollowed. Her thoughts scattered. Her body moved on instinct alone. She searched without direction, without logic, driven by a terror that did not allow for pause. Junhyuk became precise. Fear sharpened him into something familiar. He did not ask questions. He followed patterns. Silence spoke louder than witnesses ever could. Every part of him that had once been buried rose to the surface. But this time, it was controlled. Purpose replaced rage. The abandoned dock warehouse waited at the edge of the city like a held breath. Rain fell steadily, soaking concrete and rust. Neon reflections bled into puddles. The air smelled of salt and metal and consequence. Inside, violence lingered patiently. Junhyuk moved without hesitation. When he found the child, she was shaking, but alive. He shielded her with his body. He did not negotiate. He ended the threat. And in that moment, he understood something clearly for the first time. Some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. He chose consequence, because love does not always look like salvation. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. When the authorities arrived, Junhyuk did not run. Seorin held her daughter and watched as the man she loved stepped forward into accountability. She did not scream. She did not beg. She understood. And that understanding hurt more than denial ever could. Prison did not redeem him. Time did. Waiting stripped illusion. Silence dismantled ego. Power meant nothing behind concrete walls. Hope became discipline. Seorin rebuilt without bitterness. She worked. She endured. She raised her daughter with intention. She refused to let fear define their future. Years passed. Slowly, relentlessly. And somewhere inside that passing time, something patient waited to return. Time inside prison does not move forward. It circles. Days repeat themselves with slight variations, like a song played too many times until the melody loses meaning. Jun Hyuk learned quickly that survival here was not about strength. It was about restraint, about learning when not to react, about understanding that power, stripped of context, becomes liability. The first nights were the worst, not because of fear. He had lived with fear most of his life, but because of silence, the kind that presses inward, the kind that leaves a man alone with the parts of himself he has avoided. For the first time, there was no one watching him, no one waiting for orders, no one calculating his mood, no one fearing his presence. He existed without influence, and that terrified him. He replayed the night at the docks endlessly, not the violence. That part felt distant, mechanical, but the moment after, the weight of the child in his arms, the way her shaking slowed when she realized she was safe, the way she trusted him without knowing who he was. That trust haunted him, because trust is fragile, and he had spent his life breaking fragile things. Jun Hyuk learned the rhythm of confinement. Wake, wait, observe, endure. He spoke little, listened often. He had learned long ago that information reveals itself to those who do not chase it. But inside, something was changing. Without the constant reinforcement of fear, his thoughts softened. Memory returned, not selectively, but honestly. He remembered people he had dismissed, moments he had overridden, decisions he had justified too easily. Regret arrived quietly, not as guilt, as clarity. Outside, Seorin learned what absence truly meant. Not the dramatic kind portrayed in stories, not screaming or collapse, but the practical, relentless weight of missing someone who had become essential. Life did not pause for grief. Her daughter still needed structure. School still demanded attention. Bills still arrived with indifference. Seorin functioned because she had no alternative. At night, when the city quieted, the absence grew louder. She did not romanticize his sacrifice. She did not tell herself stories to soften reality. She allowed herself to feel anger, not at him, but at the world that made such choices necessary, at a system that punished protection as harshly as cruelty. Some nights, she wondered if loving him had been a mistake. Other nights, she knew it had been inevitable. Her daughter asked about him carefully, not insistently. Children sense what questions are dangerous. Is he coming back? She asked once. Seorin did not lie. I don't know, she said. That honesty felt cruel, but it was kinder than false certainty. Time passed. Seasons changed. The city continued its restless breathing. Seorin rebuilt herself around routine. She found strength not in ambition, but in consistency, in waking each morning and choosing steadiness, in refusing to let bitterness root itself in her home. She spoke about Junhyuk rarely, not because she wanted to forget, but because she did not want absence to define them. Inside prison, Junhyuk learned humility, not the performative kind, the real kind, the kind that comes from dependence. He learned what it meant to wait for permission, to accept delay, to exist without command. And slowly, something unexpected happened. He slept, not deeply, but honestly. Letters arrived sporadically, short, careful, measured. Seorin did not fill them with promises. She spoke of daily life, of small victories, of her daughter's growth. She allowed him to remain human, not heroic. That mattered more than devotion. Years did not pass dramatically. They accumulated. Junhyuk aged quietly, not in body, but in perception. He stopped imagining the future as a return to power. He imagined silence. He imagined usefulness without dominance. He imagined standing in a room without needing to control it. That imagination frightened him and steadied him. When release finally came, it did not feel triumphant. It felt fragile. Freedom is not liberation when it arrives without certainty. Seorin did not rush to meet him. That decision surprised even her. She realized she needed to see who he was now, not who he had been to her. Love requires recognition, not memory. When they met again, it was quiet. No tears, no dramatic reunion. They stood facing each other, changed. Time had carved new lines into both of them. Seorin noticed the stillness in him first. Not tension, stillness. They spoke cautiously, not because of fear, but because words matter more when you have fewer illusions left. Seorin asked questions she had once avoided, about regret, about anger, about whether violence still lived inside him. Junhyuk answered without defensiveness. I don't trust myself the way I used to, he said, and that's new. That honesty mattered. Her daughter watched him closely, older now, more observant. She did not run to him. She waited. Trust, once broken by absence, requires patience to rebuild. Junhyuk did not rush her. He waited. Life reassembled itself slowly, not into what it had been, but into something new. Junhyuk struggled with invisibility. People no longer stepped aside. No one lowered their voice. Freedom, he discovered, required humility he was still learning. Seo Rin struggled with expectation. She feared slipping into old patterns. She guarded her independence fiercely. And yet, she noticed something different. He did not seek control. He sought permission. That changed everything. The city tested them. A look held too long. A name whispered carefully. Surin felt fear tighten in her chest. She asked the question she had been carrying since his return. Will this follow us forever? Junhyuk did not comfort her with fantasy. Yes, he said, but it doesn't get to decide who we become. He began rebuilding his life with intention, legitimate work, unfamiliar humility, frequent failure. He learned that redemption does not announce itself. It proves itself slowly, through repetition. Seorin watched him change without interfering. She had learned that transformation must be self-directed to be real. Love does not rescue, it witnesses. Her daughter's school held an event one afternoon. Parents gathered. Conversations overlapped. Seorin felt the old anxiety return, the instinct to scan for danger. She watched her daughter search the room. Then, without hesitation, the girl walked to Junhyuk, sat beside him, took his hand, unafraid. Seorin felt something release inside her. Not fear, control. Love had already made its decision. That night, Seorin cried quietly, not from pain, but from exhaustion, from years of vigilance finally loosening its grip. Junhyuk did not try to stop her. He sat beside her. Presence had become his language. They argued occasionally, not destructively. Honestly, disagreement no longer meant danger. That was new. Junhyuk learned how to apologize without humiliation. Seorin learned how to accept care without guilt. Both learned that love after trauma is deliberate, not dramatic. Time passed. Peace grew stronger. Not because the world softened, but because they did. And somewhere beneath that quiet growth, legacy began to form. Peace did not arrive suddenly. It arrived in fragments, incomplete, cautious, easily disturbed. Seorin noticed it first in the small things, in the way Mornings no longer felt rushed by fear, in the way her body stopped bracing itself when footsteps sounded behind her, in the way silence began to feel neutral instead of threatening. Peace, she learned, does not feel joyful at first. It feels unfamiliar. Junhyuk struggled more openly now, not with anger, that had softened, but with purpose. For years, his identity had been external, defined by command, by reaction, by consequence. Without those forces shaping his days, he felt unanchored. Freedom asked questions power never had. Who are you when no one needs you to be dangerous? He tried different forms of work. Some failed quietly, others failed loudly. Each failure forced him to confront impatience he had once masked with authority. He learned how exhausting it was to start without advantage, how humbling it was to wait for opportunity instead of creating it through fear. And yet, he persisted, because for the first time, something depended on his restraint. Seo Rin observed these struggles without interference. She had learned, through pain, that love cannot be instructional. Guidance offered too quickly becomes control disguised as care. She allowed him space to fail. That trust was radical. Her daughter continued to change, not dramatically, but decisively. She spoke with more certainty, asked sharper questions, observed emotional nuance with a calm maturity that surprised Seorin. One evening she asked, "Do people choose who they become?" Seorin paused before answering. "Yes," she said finally, "but not all at once." The girl considered this carefully. Junhyuk thought about legacy more often now, not reputation, but residue. What remains after presence fades. He wondered how much of a man's life is remembered, and how much is simply felt by those closest to him. He wondered what his existence would mean to a child who had seen him choose patience over dominance. That question mattered more than redemption ever had. The city tested them again, not with violence, with memory. Someone from Jun Hyuk's past recognized him one afternoon. A glance held too long, a name spoken softly, almost respectfully. Seorin noticed the tension immediately. Fear returned, not explosive, but sharp. That night, she asked quietly, "Is this ever going to stop?" Junhyuk did not offer comfort. "No," he said, "but it doesn't have to grow." A letter arrived weeks later. No threats, no demands, just a name. Someone he had once spared, someone who wanted to meet. Junhyuk did not tell Seorin immediately, not out of secrecy, but consideration. He needed to understand his own intentions before involving her. When he finally told her, she listened carefully, not fearfully. "I won't stop you," she said, "but I won't protect you from it either." That clarity steadied him. The meeting was brief, awkward, heavy with years that could not be rewritten. The man did not want revenge. He wanted closure. That request unsettled Junhyuk more than violence ever had. Because violence has rules. Closure requires honesty. Afterward, Junhyuk sat alone for a long time, not ashamed, but humbled. He understood something then. Survival is not atonement. Peace does not erase responsibility. It requires reckoning. That night, he told Seorin everything, not selectively, not strategically, fully. She listened without interruption, without judgment, without rescuing him from discomfort. That was love. Seorin noticed something shift within herself too. She had spent years protecting her independence so fiercely that vulnerability felt dangerous. But listening to him now, she realized vulnerability did not weaken her. It clarified her boundaries. Her daughter's relationship with Junhyuk deepened slowly, not through grand gestures, through consistency. He attended events. He remembered details. He waited when trust wavered. Children recognize patience instinctively. One afternoon, as they walked home together, her daughter asked him, "Do you miss who you were?" Junhyuk answered honestly. "No," he said, "but I understand him better now." She nodded. That answer satisfied her. Seorin realized she had stopped defining herself by escape. She no longer thought of herself as a woman who survived something terrible. She thought of herself as a woman who chose daily. Time moved gently now. Arguments softened. Listening replaced winning. Silence became shared rather than tense. They spoke openly about aging, about illness, about the possibility that love would one day require caretaking instead of passion. Neither flinched. Real love does not avoid inevitability. Junhyuk learned that redemption is not something you achieve. It is something you practice, daily, quietly, without witnesses. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered if he deserved the life he had built. Seorin answered him without words. She stayed. They spoke about death once, not morbidly, practically. Seorin said she wanted to be remembered as kind. Junhyuk said he wanted to be remembered as gentle. The contrast made them laugh. The city did not change. The shadows remained, but fear no longer dictated direction. One evening, as they walked beside the river, Seorin realized something profound. The city was the same. They were not. Junhyuk no longer scanned crowds. Trust had replaced vigilance, not blindness, confidence. Her daughter stood between them, taller now, stronger, unburdened. Seorin felt gratitude, not for luck, but for choice. Some people leave behind power, others leave behind peace. This was not a story about redemption. It was a story about continuation. And as the city lights reflected on the water, Seorin rested her head against Junhyuk's shoulder. No urgency, no fear, just time, allowed to pass. Time does something strange when life finally becomes quiet. It no longer announces itself. It no longer demands attention. It simply moves, gently, persistently, asking nothing but awareness. Seorin noticed this first in her body. The tension she had carried for years did not disappear all at once. It loosened gradually, like a knot slowly remembering how to untie itself. Some mornings, she still woke with unease, resting behind her ribs, a phantom instinct left over from survival. But the feeling no longer dictated her day. She acknowledged it. Then she moved on. That was new. Junhyuk began to understand time differently as well. In the past, time had been an enemy, something to outrun, to dominate, to compress into efficiency. Now, time felt expansive, almost generous. He no longer measured days by outcome, but by presence. Did I listen today? Did I choose restraint? Did I leave this moment better than I found it? These questions guided him more reliably than ambition ever had. There were still difficult days, days when old instincts surfaced unexpectedly. A raised voice in a crowded place, a sudden argument nearby, a look that lingered too long. On those days, Junhyuk felt the familiar tightening in his chest. But instead of reacting, he paused, he breathed, and he chose. That pause, that single space between impulse and action, became his greatest achievement. Seorin watched him carefully, not with suspicion, but with awareness. Trust, she had learned, was not blindness. It was clarity without fear. She did not pretend the past did not exist. She simply refused to let it dominate the present. This distinction gave her strength. Her daughter continued to grow into herself, not loudly, not rebelliously, but with quiet certainty. She spoke her mind, asked thoughtful questions, observed emotional shifts with a perceptiveness that made Seorin both proud and cautious. Children raised in instability often grow up quickly. Seorin worked hard to ensure her daughter grew wisely instead. One evening, long after the city had settled into its nighttime rhythm, Seorin sat alone at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, not lonely, quiet. She thought about the version of herself that once believed survival was the same as living, that believed endurance was love, that believed silence was safety. She felt compassion for that woman now, not embarrassment. Growth had softened her judgment. Junhyuk joined her at the table without speaking. They had grown accustomed to shared silence. It no longer needed explanation. He poured tea. She watched the steam rise slowly. This, she thought, is what peace looks like. Later that night, Junhyuk lay awake. Sleep still came unevenly at times. Memories surfaced when his guard was down. Not violent ones, but moments of choice. Crossroads he had not recognized as such until years later. He did not punish himself for them anymore. He studied them. Understanding replaced shame. He thought about legacy again, not as something grand, but as something intimate. What would this child remember about him? Not his past, but his presence. Would she remember patience, consistency, calm? He hoped so. The world did not offer closure in clean lines. Some wounds never fully healed. Some memories never softened. But Junhyuk had learned something essential. Healing does not require forgetting. It requires integration. Months passed, then years. There is a point in life where survival stops being the primary goal. Seo-rin did not notice the exact moment it happened. There was no announcement, no relief sharp enough to mark the transition. It revealed itself quietly. Through the absence of panic, she realized one morning that her body no longer woke before her mind, that her heart was no longer racing ahead of the day, preparing for danger that might never come. The habit of fear had loosened its grip. That, she understood, was healing. Not the dramatic kind, the honest kind. For years, Seorin had believed strength meant endurance. It meant carrying weight without complaint. It meant standing upright, even when the ground beneath her felt unstable. She had mistaken survival for virtue, because survival was all she had known. Now, strength looked different. It looked like rest. It looked like trust. It looked like allowing joy without waiting for punishment. She thought often about the woman she used to be, not with resentment, with tenderness. That woman had done everything she could with what she had. She had stayed when staying felt safer than leaving. She had left when leaving became the only way to remain whole. She had loved cautiously, then deeply, then deliberately. Seorin no longer judged her past self. She honored her. Junhyuk experienced this shift differently. For him, peace did not feel natural at first. It felt undeserved, suspicious, like something that might be taken away if he acknowledged it too openly. He had lived so long under the belief that calm was temporary, that stillness was merely the pause before impact. Even now, in moments of quiet, he sometimes waited for consequence. Old instincts do not disappear, they soften. Junhyuk often reflected on the cost of who he had been, not in a dramatic way, but in fragments. A look he remembered, a voice he no longer heard, a choice that had redirected someone else's life permanently. He did not dwell, but he did not dismiss these memories either. They were reminders, not of guilt, but of responsibility. He understood now that redemption was not a destination. It was maintenance, a daily discipline, like keeping a fragile structure standing through careful attention rather than force. Seoul noticed the way he moved through the world now. He no longer took up unnecessary space. He no longer scanned rooms for dominance or threat. He walked beside her, not ahead, not behind. That detail mattered more than words ever could. Motherhood for Seoul had also changed shape. In the early years, it had been fueled by vigilance, by protection sharpened into instinct. She had measured every environment, every person, every silence for potential harm. Now, motherhood felt expansive instead of defensive. Her daughter was growing into herself, forming opinions, testing boundaries, stepping forward without looking back for permission. Seoul felt both pride and grief in that growth. Letting go, she realized, was also a form of love. Junhyuk struggled sometimes with knowing where he fit in that evolution. He did not want to overstep. He did not want to replace. He did not want to retreat. Finding balance required humility and patience. There were moments when he felt the old urge to assert certainty, to provide answers instead of presence. But he stopped himself, because the child did not need a figure of authority. She needed consistency. She needed safety that did not demand obedience. One evening, as they sat quietly together, Seorin realized something subtle but profound. She trusted him, not because she believed he would never fail, but because she believed he would take responsibility if he did. That distinction changed everything. Trust, she learned, is not the absence of doubt. It is the confidence that doubt can be addressed. Junhyuk began to understand love in ways he never had before, not as possession, not as loyalty enforced by fear, but as choice, renewed daily. Seorin did not belong to him. She stayed. That difference humbled him more than rejection ever could. Sometimes, late at night, Junhyuk imagined alternate versions of his life, paths he might have taken, outcomes that would have left him powerful, respected, untouched by consequence. Those versions felt hollow now. Power without connection, he realized, is just isolation with a title. Seorin sometimes imagined her life without him, not because she doubted their future, but because she finally trusted herself to survive without defining herself through anyone else. That independence made her love deeper, freer. They talked about aging, about bodies changing, about fear shifting from external threats to internal fragility. They spoke about illness without superstition, about death without panic. Neither rushed these conversations. Avoidance had lost its appeal. Junhyuk learned that love was not proven in intensity. It was proven in endurance, in staying gentle when boredom arrived, in remaining kind when excitement faded, in choosing patience when nothing dramatic demanded it. Seorin felt her life expand beyond reaction. She pursued interests without justification. She rested without guilt. She allowed herself to enjoy moments fully instead of scanning for danger at their edges. Joy, she learned, is not reckless. Fear had been. Years passed, not loudly, but meaningfully. Their life did not become extraordinary. It became stable. And stability, after chaos, felt like luxury. Junhyuk found peace in anonymity. No one expected anything from him. No one feared him. No one remembered him for what he had once been. At first, This invisibility felt like loss. Later, it felt like grace. Seorin watched her daughter step into the world with confidence, not hardened, not naive, balanced. She realized then that love had done its quiet work, not through control, but through example. On an ordinary day, unmarked by ceremony, Seorin understood that she had crossed a threshold. She no longer identified as someone who had survived something terrible. She identified as someone who had built something good. Junhyuk felt the same realization settle within him. He was no longer running from his past. He was carrying it responsibly. That was enough. If love is measured by intensity, theirs would not impress. If love is measured by longevity, patience, and restraint, it would endure. This was not a story of rescue, or redemption, or triumph. It was a story of staying, and sometimes staying is the bravest thing a person can do. Not marked by drama, but by repetition. Routine became sacred, morning walks, shared meals, ordinary disagreements, unremarkable evenings. These moments built a life more durable than passion alone ever could. Seorin noticed that love had changed shape. It was no longer sharp. It was expansive. It did not demand reassurance. It offered stability. One afternoon, her daughter came home quieter than usual. She sat at the table, pushing her food around absent-mindedly. Seorin noticed immediately. "What happened?" she asked gently. The girl hesitated, then said, "We talked about families today." Seorin waited. She asked where my father was. Seorin felt the old ache stir, not sharply, but familiarly. "And what did you say?" she asked. The girl shrugged. "I said I have a family, just not the kind people expect." That answer stayed with Seorin long after the conversation ended. Expectation, she realized, had been one of her greatest enemies. Once released, it freed everything else. Junyuk spoke with the girl later that evening. He did not correct her. He did not redefine her words. He listened. Then he said, "Families aren't built from perfection. They're built from care." She smiled. That was enough. There were moments of fear still. A news report, a rumor, a name resurfacing unexpectedly. Seorin felt anxiety return like a reflex, but fear no longer paralyzed her. She faced it. Together, they faced it. Junhyuk knew his past would never disappear entirely, but it no longer defined the perimeter of his future. He had learned the most difficult lesson of all. You cannot undo who you were, but you can decide who you continue to be. One night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Seorin spoke a truth she had been holding quietly. "I used to think love had to hurt to be real," she said. Junhyuk did not interrupt. "I don't believe that anymore." He nodded. Neither of them felt the need to elaborate. The city aged with them. Buildings changed, stores closed, new lights replaced old signs. Life continued, and so did they. Seorin sometimes wondered what their story would sound like if told by someone else. Would it seem dramatic, tragic, romantic? She realized it did not matter. Stories belong to those who live them. Junhyuk grew comfortable with anonymity. Being unknown was no longer a loss. It was freedom. Her daughter grew taller, stronger, more assured. Seorin watched her step into the world without fear and felt something close to awe. This, she thought, is why choices matter. Years later, on an ordinary evening, Seorin realized something quietly profound. She was happy, not excited, not euphoric, happy, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that stays. Hyuk felt it too, in the absence of urgency, in the steadiness of routine, in the knowledge that he was no longer running from himself. Love had not saved them. Choice had, and love had stayed. If this story has a lesson, it is not about redemption or sacrifice. It is about patience, about restraint, about the courage to live gently in a world that rewards force. Some lives are loud, others are meaningful, and this one, quietly, deliberately, became both.